rays of the sun, the kind that burn you, they don't even make it that far. Interesting. So it's one of my little side notes. It doesn't really have anything to do with the story, but it's fun, right? Good fact. So, a couple of things though. So he's from Uz. Now that is important because that Uz is in Edom. And when you take into account when Job, and one thing about scholars in the Bible is the fact is we just don't know a lot of stuff. A lot of times we have to just kind of put together pieces and say, well, here's the best argument I can make. And that changes over time. That's interesting. Even though a lot of scholars a lot of times talk about, well, I just look at things objectively, and that's just kind of how we do things. Nobody looks at anything objectively. You always bring who you are when you're looking at texts or anything. You can't just step outside of yourself, right? So scholarship does change, but kind of right now, and this makes sense to me. After exile, if I mention something that nobody's familiar with, please raise your hand. But exile, we got that one. So the people living in Judah get run over by the Babylonians, and they take them into exile in Babylonia, and then they come back from exile, right? As told in Ezra. Well, when they come back, it's interesting. At that point, we call this the Second Temple period because it's when that Second Temple is built. There's a lot of questions. You get back and people start asking things like, wow, it's been a long time since the kingdom of David was around. How can we get that back? And the answer is, well, you really can't. That's pretty far gone. Well, how can we come close? And there's lots of ideas about how to make that happen, about how to make society happen, about how to sacrifice in the temple, about who should be priests, and this and that. And there arise a number of kind of, you might call mainstream ideas about how things are supposed to work. It's in the setting that Job is written. And one of the things that's more mainstream, okay, is you see an idea, you see it all over in texts in the Bible, of ideas that are very kind of anti-foreigner, you might say. And a lot of these ideas, Deuteronomy is a good place to take a look and see some of these. So, for instance, in Deuteronomy, there's laws about you know what the marriage laws are like in Deuteronomy?
We looked at these a little bit. They read Ruth also.
Ruth's a good one.
And then we looked at some of the laws and talked about how the laws impacted the characters in the book of Ruth. So you've looked at a few of these laws that Mr. Naegle is talking about?
So if you're an ancient Israelite, who are you supposed to marry? A Moabite, right?
Are you supposed to marry a Moabite?
No. A Hittite? No? Negative? Who? Another Israelite. Okay? This idea is very mainstream, right when people are coming back from the exile. Well, books like Job and Ruth and Jonah, that's when these stories are likely start being told. And it's interesting that each of them has a little something in it to kind of push back against the idea. Job's not from Judah. He's not an Israelite. He's from Uz. He's from Edom. So right in the first verse already it's saying, look, here's going to be the protagonist of this story. He's not Israelite. Ooh, what are we going to do with this? Okay. Ruth's the same way, right? Ruth is a Moabite. But the text doesn't go through and say, and thus we see that Ruth was evil and you should never try and do anything like Ruth. That's not what it says in there. So these texts are pushing back against this idea that all foreigners are bad. So we've got that going on. Now, in a lot of your questions, let's actually, we have Bibles. One question I did have, what version, what translation of the Bible do you guys read? All sorts of them, I'm guessing?
So
what are some of them?
The school asks them to buy the Oxford Annotated NRSV, but in the summer work, some of them are using other translations that they like to read.
Right.
So if you're not using the red one from school, Would you please tell Mr.
Well,
Naegle what
actually,
translation
yeah,
you're using?
yeah, just for an example.
Real quick.
What do you
I
got?
have NIV.
NIV?
Oh, I have that too, but
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, not what.
It's a popular translation, for sure. I actually, this is what I recommend to my class, though. I kind of don't mind if people bring other ones, because it's really, really interesting when you're reading Bible with each other. If you do have other translations, because then, someone might say, well, that's actually, it gets said this way in my translations. And so people often ask me, what's the best translation of the Bible? And the answer to that is to go learn Hebrew. But a second place answer
Which is what Mr. Schoen said yesterday too, right? Basically, no translation on its own is going to be as good as the Hebrew.
Yeah. But a second place to that is to look at several translations. See what they say. Yeah.
So is the closest translation like the Torah for Hebrew?
It depends on, I guess, how you're using the Torah. So the Torah can mean, this gets interesting. The Torah can mean actually a number of things. Probably I'll say it gets used most as a term to describe the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So that gets used in that sense, Torah. Now, you can be talking about the Torah in Hebrew,